try to avoid reading newspapers because really very often it's just extremely annoying. But sometimes you can't avoid it. And this is what I saw. By owning a pet, you are doing more damage to the environment than you might realise. Pamela, Animal Justice Emergency. You read something like that and you don't want to read on, do you, as a vegan? I don't really want to read on. And that's why I try and avoid reading the newspapers. But this piece was written by somebody that is a Facebook friend of mine, and I'd actually had an exchange on Facebook with him where he was saying the same thing, basically, that owning, quote unquote, owning a companion animal is really bad for the environment. And he went on about it, and I basically said, well, what about the animal death industry? And then he said, nothing. So I thought, this is an opportunity, that's Bob, my cat, this is an opportunity to answer some of the things that he's put in his... I used to be very much an environmentalist for all of my life from about the age of 15. I also used to write regularly for The Independent. So I guess I just felt like, well, I kind of understand where you came from, but you're writing for The Independent and you have a responsibility. This is what he's saying. And partly it's the tone that I found a bit annoying. He was saying, truth-telling about pets can be a painful process, but cats and dogs particularly are having a devastating impact on the planet. When pets can emit twice the carbon emissions of our home's electricity and kill up to 200 million wild prey in the UK every year, we cannot stay silent, says Donald. For obvious reasons, truth-telling about pets can be a painful process, but it's not something we should shy away from. In many cases, pet ownership is simply another form of destructive consumerism. I do agree with him there. I think that's absolutely right, particularly when they're obviously bred animals. Of real concern is the vulnerability of endangered bird species in habitats close to urban cats. When some species are down to the last few dozen, everyone lost to cat predation may be a final step to extinction. Sounds bad, doesn't it? If it was true, it would be bad. It's not true. He's been cherry-picking the data, quoting studies, but ignoring what the studies say, their own caveats. I went back to the sources that he cited and did a little bit of extra research. First of all, one of the papers that he quotes, McCarthy is talking specifically about the numbers of species made or potentially becoming extinct. The study says, despite the relative paucity of unequivocal evidence of a negative effect on prey populations. So basically they're saying there is no actual, total, unequivocal evidence on the impact of prey populations, what they call prey populations. Then they say, predation rates are only meaningful in context of prey availability. Patterns of predation have been quantified in just one major urban conurbation in the Northern Hemisphere. So that's saying the data isn't really available and it's only been done in one city in the Northern Hemisphere. The study also said the survey, they're calling it a survey, this is the one that McCarthy is quoting all the time. The survey was not intended to gauge the impact of predation by cats on the population dynamics of their prey, so no data on prey populations were collected. It's the exact opposite of what he said in his piece. So he's been leaping to conclusions, conflating data and basically twisting what the study that he's quoted has actually said. And he's also put in a bit of, no subs picked it up, inaccurate nonsense like when pets can emit twice the carbon emissions of our home's electricity. No, it's not a question of methane coming out of them. No, this is just insanity. He's actually referring, I think, to the cat litter and the way that that's produced and the impact of that, and also the meat, the animal dead bodies that animals like cats are fed. But it's not like that the animals themselves, the cats and the dogs, are emitting carbon emissions, because they're not. This piece was dishonest and skewed, but the question is why. As I said, I know this guy is really a dedicated environmentalist. He's so dedicated that apart from his campaigning for maybe decades, he's a spokesperson for XR. And it's incredible, really, that he, like a load of environmentalists and XR people in general, have got this same blind spot. You know, it's like, rah, 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 climate change is happening, you know, species are going extinct, we need to tell the truth, and that's probably why he's banging on about telling the truth in his piece. But don't worry about getting vegan. No, it's not important. Forget it. No, and I'm not vegan. He's not vegan. It says he's a semi-vegan, which means he's not vegan. So he'd rather ignore the real criminals in this case, animal agriculture, the real people who are devastating the environment, devastating biodiversity, polluting rivers, making species go extinct. Instead of tackling them, you'd rather target innocent companion cats and dogs. So why is that? It is a fundamental problem with a lot of environmentalists and other people. But particularly with environmentalists, they are so embedded in their own human supremacist attitudes, their own speciesist attitudes, that to challenge that, they can't face it, because they can hardly say to their readers, well, you know, it's all about animal agriculture, when they themselves are not vegan. Just to get a bit of perspective on what's actually going on, according to a well-researched piece in The Guardian, at least 1 in 5 British wild mammals is facing extinction within a decade. And they say that intensive farming is one of the main causes of this. And that is a quote from Fiona Matthews, who's the president of the Mammal Society. Let's talk about numbers, because Donald talks about 10 million cats, okay? He seems to think that's a huge number, compared with the UK population, 64 million. Farmed animals, quote, 44 million. Chickens, who are not counted as farmed animals, 181 million chickens. Disappearance of all these species has less to do with innocent cats and dogs, and everything to do with the destructive environmental death machine that is animal agriculture. And why can't he say that? He's talking about the importance of telling the truth. It's not mentioned once. The Environmental Agency, not, you know, known as being particularly radical, says that agriculture uses 70% of the land in England. Farmers, they say, have a major impact on the environment. Toxic waste in rivers, they dump nearly, in just one case, 10,000 chicken bodies were dumped in woodland, and they were caught and fined a measly £2,000. You have a lot of these farmers just repeating, discharging slurry into rivers. They cause massive die-offs of other species, and even small amounts of this slurry are very, very toxic. We've got somebody here who I wouldn't normally be on the same page with, who says agricultural policy is an endemic problem that is the major cause of the drastic decline in freshwater fish species in the UK. And the person that says that is the chief executive of the Angling Society. So they would obviously have a lot of interest in monitoring this sort of things. And even he is saying, he's not an environmentalist, he's saying the agricultural policy, and he's talking about, you know, these intensive farms, animal agriculture, they're all talking about animal agriculture basically, and subsidies. If Don McCarthy wanted to speak about who's really causing the loss of species, he could target the likes of the animal death industry producers like Fashenda, Moy Park Tulip, Cargill, Two Sisters, Banham Poultry. And they supply Tesco's, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Asda, McDonald's, Nando's. He could talk about this, subsidies. Tens of millions of pounds. Some figures are saying 3.1 billion. The World Wildlife Fund, which is an extremely corporate NGO, not at all radical, has identified habitat loss as the greatest threat to the variety of life on the planet today, and is identified as the main threat to 85% of all species on the red list, which is the threatened endangered species list. So it's environment and habitat loss. So Don McCarthy could also be talking about the drivers who concrete over their gardens to store their planet-destroying cars on, or anyone consuming animal bodies and secretions who are far more culpable than innocent kitties, lap or feral. As I said, acknowledging this would mean that McCarthy would have to acknowledge his own innate speciesism and human supremacy. So I thought we could fix it for Donald. So the headline would be, instead of by owning a pet you are doing more damage to the environment than you might realise, try by consuming the body parts and secretion of other animals. You are doing more damage to the environment than you might realise. Instead of, truth-telling about pets can be a painful process, but cats and dogs particularly are having a devastating impact on the planet. You could say, truth-telling about what you eat can be a painful process, but consuming animal body parts and secretion particularly are having a devastating impact on the planet. He said, for obvious reasons, truth-telling about pets to friends can be a painful process, but it is not something we should shy away from for obvious reasons. Truth-telling about what they eat to friends can be a painful process, but it's not something we should shy away from. These are the same people that will talk about preachy vegans, the importance of being honest and the importance of being truthful. They say we should be preachy in some cases. Last one. Of real concern is the vulnerability of endangered bird species in habitats close to urban cats. When some species are down to their last few dozen, every one lost to cat predation may be a final step to extinction. We could say instead, of real concern is the vulnerability of endangered bird species in habitats destroyed by the animal death industries. When some species are down to the last few dozen, everyone lost to the animal death industry may be a final step to extinction. Now that is telling the truth, Donald. That is telling the truth. So I'm going to link to his piece down below. If you've got any thoughts about that, and if you'd like to see some more balanced reporting, the section of The Independent that he is writing for is called Voices. And the woman to contact there is Hannah Fearn, Fearn. There are various people to contact there, and I put their details down below in the description. So you might want to email them. Some of them are on Twitter, and I'll put their links there as well. And say, hey, we'd like to start telling the truth about, the animal death industry. There's something coming up about mink as well. Populations of mink, millions and millions and millions, are going to be slaughtered in Denmark. And this is something I'd like to write about for the Voices opinion thing. So I would put the link there, and maybe you can suggest that you'd like to see some accurate and truthful opinion about that. And I'll be contacting her as well. And it's really worthwhile contacting these editors, because then they know, they have an idea of who's actually interested and what sort of content they're interested in. And for every one email that they get, they'll probably be thinking, well, maybe that's 50 vegans who want to hear some more sensible and truthful and accurate reporting. So it's well worth doing. And as I said, I will be personally pitching some stories to them in the future. So, more recommended videos here. Really appreciate your time. This is Pamela from Animal Justice Emergency. Together we can stop the war on other animals.